Welcome everyone to Disruptive Conversations. I'm Dr. Risa Reiger, and I'm here today with you and my guest, Chelsea Ohlemiller, Chelsea Ohlemiller, who has joined already, and I'm viewing her request, and we're gonna go. See if this is on. Let's see if this is going to buffer right now. This is our first outdoors. Chelsea?
Hello, how are you?
Yeah. Well, that was seamless. Yay, us. Fantastic. So I'm going to introduce myself, introduce you, and then we're off and running. So welcome everyone to Disruptive Conversations with entrepreneurs, influencers, thought leaders, authors, in which we deep dive into the experiences these women have needed to navigate and conquer in order to have achieved their personal and professional success up to this moment in time. I'm Dr. Risa Reiger, clinical psychologist, and I'm an expert in change. I help individuals, companies, and teams make positive change, and positive change can happen at any point in time. You're never too late. But in order to make change, we need to disrupt. We need to disrupt a thought, a feeling, a belief, a habit in order to create our 10.0 lives. And that's what this series of conversations is all about. And today, to help us on that journey, I have Chelsea Ohlemiller, who is going to be sharing her journey with us. And here's some of what Chelsea has been up to. She's recently launched her book, so we give her a huge congrats on that. So Chelsea is a wife and mother of 3. She writes to encourage and comfort. Find her story in heartfelt words at Happiness, Hope, and Harsh Realities, where her first book, Now That She's Gone, A Daughter's Reflections on Lost Love and a Mother's Legacy, has been released, because this is August 2024. Thank you. Put it up again. And there it is. Listen, it's a huge accomplishment, Chelsea. And so first and foremost, welcome. And is there anything that I've left out of your bio, both that you would like to tell us about before we move on?
No, I don't think so. You did a great job.
Okay, wonderful. So Chelsea, what is it that you needed to disrupt in yourself in order to have achieved your personal and professional success up to this point in time?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is just realizing that grief itself was a disruptor in my life. My mom passed in 2017. She was only 57. And so my entire life was disrupted without, my consent or my will, I guess. And so I was a teacher back then. I had a great career and life and all those things. And really, grief just shattered what I thought and how my future was going to look. And so I think the first thing is just accepting the disruption that wasn't my own, and then disrupting that, because what happened in the grief and all of that is I became stagnant. I was surviving, but I wasn't really living. And so I had to disrupt the grief process a little bit and say, okay, there's still beauty in what remains. I have to get up. I have to step. And I first have to acknowledge what's happened, and then also decide what I'm going to do to get out of this situation. And so I think the first step for me was just really acknowledging that and deciding that I was ready to move forward, even though my life was going to look significantly different than what I had planned.
So just to fill us in a little bit so we have more context and we can connect and understand more of what you experienced, what is it that happened with your mother?
Yeah, so she got cancer. She had had multiple cancers through her life. She had a rare gene mutation, but what ended up happening is she was always recovering from them. So I think we thought she always would. But in 2017, she was diagnosed in February and given 2 years plus to live. And by July, she was gone. So months later. And so, I always tell people it happened really unexpectedly and really quickly. Like I said, she was 57, and I was fresh, in my 30s and trying to navigate what adulthood looked like. And so, yeah, it was sudden in the sense that we thought we had much more time than we did.
Wow.
And it crept up on us quickly and really just shook everything. It shook my professional life, my life as a mother, my life as a wife, my just life in general with friends and family. And so I left teaching and eventually started writing, just really to heal and to process what was happening in my life. And that became the beautiful platform that I have today, where the hope is that I'm helping other people whose life has been disrupted by grief and loss that surprises us.
You're talking very specifically about this time frame and this calendar with your mom, and we all to take it to a bigger picture as well. I mean, it's such a hard piece, and that we think we have this much calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And we think about our lives and as if we have this much calendar, and sometimes we really don't have that much calendar.
Right. Most of the time we don't. Yeah, I love the beautiful quote. People send it to me a lot. Just, you think you have time, and that's so true as we're planning our lives. And we should be hopeful that we can make
Yes.
plans into next week. And I always encourage people to do that, but also to really wrap your head around just the fragility of life, and that, tomorrow isn't promised. And when that kind of grief and that kind of profound loss, it really teaches you to live differently. And you still have your days where you struggle, but there's this new sense of gratitude for just the breath that you have and the life that you're living. That, young people, my mom was 57, there are people that pass away much sooner than that, and so just realizing that there's beauty in what remains, but you have to realize that you have to live that life, and be appreciative of every moment that you have, even the difficult ones, unfortunately.
So there's a kind of a seesaw, kind of not quite a balance, but a seesaw of living your today, and also there's the whisper that you never know.
Yep.
And being hopeful that there will be more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think grief teaches you a lot of really critical elements of life that you can't learn anywhere else, and it unfortunately has been one of my best teachers. But I think my mom also showed us, my mom had lost her parents and dealt with loss. And so I think I learned both through grief and how my mom was just such a strong woman, how to overcome, these situations, because grief is universal and it will impact all of us. And it already has impacted us in small ways. Grief is not just the loss of a parent or a sibling or a child. Grief is the loss of a job or your home, or, there's little grief pieces everywhere. And so the better we know how to, occupy that space of uncomfortability, the better we can live that, meaningful life.
It takes a tremendous amount of courage, especially at the times when you can feel most vulnerable and most depleted.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the scary things, actually, of the first time I wrote. I wrote to heal myself. And when I was encouraged to share with others, it becomes a very, very vulnerable space, because I'm sharing those vulnerable pieces of my heart and my healing and my journey. And so it was scary to say, well, how are other people going to read this and, comprehend this? And the beauty is that I found when you share your own story, whatever it is, it doesn't even have to be about grief or, any of that. People are willing to show up and tell you their stories too. And then the connection made through that is something that is so beautiful, you really can't put it into words,
You've been talking about how you've learned so much. And could you share more about what it is that you have learned?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the perspective change. I think in those first moments of grief, I was so surrounded by darkness and despair and heartbreak that I forgot about the light and the hope and the love and all of those beautiful things. And so I really had to come under the perspective of that. I now carry two legacies, my own and my mother's. And I need to do something with both of those. Both of those are important. And so I want to craft something for my own children, and then also honor all of the influence and reflection of my mother's beautiful life. And to do that, you have to actually have action behind your purpose and your life and your goals. And so for me, the biggest thing was just really accepting a perspective that things are going to be the way that they are. I'm no longer going to have my mother here. And also, I still have so much life left to live for my own self and for my family. And so really just the perspective shift felt the biggest for me.
Mm-hmm. There's also I think a very profound shift, and I'll talk a little bit more about why, with no longer being a daughter for your mother, a daughter to your mother.
Yeah, and that was the harshest reality, is that I felt like I wasn't her daughter anymore. And I had to remind myself, and actually I say this in my book, is that I am still her daughter, now, always, forever, because breath and heartbeats don't change that relationship. Mm-hmm. Life doesn't change that relationship. And so it was really important to me to realize that all of those things that I still am. It's just a different capacity and a different type of relationship. So it does continue. It just looks so much different than what I would have planned.
Yes. I ran a group. I started a group a while back called Mothers Without Mothers. For women who were mothers and did not have their mothers in their lives for many different reasons. Yep. And it's the finding that space, which is what you are talking about, and in your book, of finding that continuity of relationship, even without your mother, as you say, having a heartbeat and a pulse. Right.
Yeah, and that's one thing that mothering without your mother is, oh man, it's a fragile place, because even just, stepping into new motherhood, and not having your mother there, that was hard. But what people don't realize is that continues with you, to the toddler phase. And my own daughter just turned 13. And I found myself just really missing my mom in a new way. I wanted to call her and say, what happens now? She's shifting into a young woman. And, how do you support that growth? Mm-hmm. And, all these questions that I wished I could ask her. And so, mothering without your mother is just a very delicate space. And the sad reality is that nobody, even if you have amazing family, aunts, uncles, dads, friends, and family, nobody can fill that space and that knowledge like your mother, And so it's hard to sit with that.
It is hard. It's hard to sit with that. And my mother passed away many years ago now. And this past summer, my daughter got married, mm-hmm. and I wished that she could have been there, because she would have enjoyed it so. Yep. And so there was something for me in this of enjoying it for her.
Yes.
And appreciating how much she would have enjoyed it. Now, that's not to say that it also wasn't hard and sad, right, or that I didn't shed tears. So it's both.
Yes, always both. Yes. And I always say that it's always, you're always a contradiction of things together. It's a little bit of heartbreak mixed with immense joy, And so I always find in those moments that even if I forget, like for a wedding or something that's just, a huge accomplishment or celebratory moment, usually I try to sprinkle in my mother some way, either her picture there or influences, but always in the moments that I forget, I find she still shows up for me in some way, through a stranger and something that they'll say, through something that one of my children does that reminds me of her. And so I try to look for those things, because you're always going to see that empty seat, you know, where you wished your mother would have been. But now I try to really look for, well, you know, maybe the seat isn't empty. It's just filled in a capacity that we just cannot understand, you know?
Could you say more about that and explain that?
Yeah. So at, one of the things is my mother passed away in July, like I said, and my wedding was scheduled for September.
Oh.
So there was literally an empty seat at my wedding, and I could not bear to look at that seat. And so we put a beautiful purple flower there. But throughout the whole day, I just felt like, you know, she was missing. And so it was that immense joy, but this hole inside of myself. And so as my husband and I were dancing, a beautiful, my mother's favorite color was purple, which is why the book is purple. And a beautiful purple butterfly that I can't even describe what kind of butterfly it was, came in, and it just sat right on the ledge of my wedding. And it was there the entire time my husband and I danced, the entire time we went through anything, and it just stayed there. And I thought, I'm going to use this as a sign of her influence and her hope, and just that she's here in a way that is different, you know. And do I think she was actually the butterfly? No, but it was a reminder in that moment of, whoa, let me look for the hope. Let me look for how she's here in a different way. And so I try to do that, and it's not always easy. You know, sometimes I'll ask her for signs like a red cardinal or things, and I don't get them. But that hope, just knowing that I might have one show up for me, carries me forward for lighter days and a heavier or a lighter grief than what I'm normally carrying.
So you're going in with the idea and the reality that grief takes different forms at different times.
Always. Yes. I always tell people, you know, we hear about the stages of grief, and I feel like it's more of a web, you know, you're just constantly working your way through and weaving back and forth. And it's just this tangled web of things you're going to experience forever. You're not going to get out of it, but it will become lighter. Your perspective will change. It will be different than it was before, but it never truly evaporates or, you know, leaves.
And that's very important. And what I'm hearing in what you're saying is the importance of underscoring that there isn't a right way to grieve.
Oh, yes.
And that we don't have a calendar. We don't go through the stages and then just cross it off the list. Okay, that's done.
Right.
You know, that's not how the heart works.
Right.
That's not how
And
relationships work.
that's exactly right. That's not how relationships work. And, you know, I lost my mother. I have a younger sister. She lost my mother too, but the two of us grieve very differently, even though we're grieving the exact same woman, you know? And so I definitely make it known to people that you're going to grieve so much differently, even than your siblings, even than, you know, your aunts, your uncles, your father. Every single person is going to grieve this relationship differently, because your relationship was so unique. You know, like our fingerprints are so unique to us, as are our relationships, which means our healing is going to be unique in that same exact way, you know. And we found that to be true just within my own family, you know, component. And so the biggest thing is to acknowledge that it's okay to grieve. It's okay if you're crying. It's okay. And really just normalizing that I had to learn, you know, I had to show up authentically in my grief if I wanted my children to grieve authentically. And so just knowing that it's going to look different for everybody, and that's okay. It's okay if yours looks different.
And as a mom, as a person, showing grief can be uncomfortable for other people. And they want you to get through it.
Yes.
And just be like, well, why can't you just celebrate them? And I wonder if this is a kind of a curt for you, that it's okay for us to laugh with other people, or to start laughing, but somehow crying is not okay.
Right. Yes. I mean, that was one of the hardest lessons too, is just grief is so uncomfortable for people. And I think it's because, you see it as a mom, when my kids are hurt, they skin their knee. I want to hurry and, help them and comfort them. And so I think that what happens is when we're meeting with a friend or even a stranger that says, "Hey, how are you doing?" And you're like, "I'm actually not doing that well." I think immediately they want to comfort, but it's not something that can be fixed. It's not something that can be mended. And so that really makes people uncomfortable. They can't help, they feel helpless. And so it's really just learning to sit with that uncomfortable space and showing up for people. And I think the more we talk about it, the more it's getting, more common that people are expressing their heartbreak or their sorrows. But I think it's a constant work in progress, even for ourselves, because I still have days where I smile my way through and tell everybody I'm great when really nobody knows it's my mom's birthday and I'm actually holding this really deep sadness. And so still learning, I think it's always a constant progress to show up authentically and then also accept others when they show up authentically, even if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable.
It's a hard thing to bear witness.
It is.
It
And I tell
is
people,
really hard.
not everybody is worthy of experiencing your grief or your loss. Not everybody is worthy of that side of you. And I think part of that is learning who is your comfortable person, who is your safe space, your safe people, because not everybody is going to show up for you the way that you want. And so knowing those safe people is really important.
And also, as you're talking, you were mentioning your children, and you also model what grief looks like and what loss looks like for your children. And I wonder what your thoughts have been about that.
Yeah. So I actually had a wonderful therapist after my mom passed. I, was having somebody help me through it because I didn't know what it would
Mm-hmm.
look like. And for a long time, I would hide in the bathroom to cry if I was having a weak moment or go in my room. And she told me, if you want them to think it's okay to be sad, to be hurting, you have to show them. And that changed everything for me. After that, there are certain times if you're in complete despair, you're not going to show that to your children. But if I'm just tearful because I saw a recipe that reminded me of my mom, it's okay to say, "Oh, this recipe reminds me of Meme, and I'm thinking about her today." And so just naming the emotions for the children and saying, "Oh, that's sadness," or "That's grief," or "This is what mourning is," so that they know, because those are things you don't learn in school. You learn that through experience. And so I I had to learn that for myself, through a therapist that told me, "Hey, it's okay to show them because they don't know. This is something they haven't experienced yet."
And that you can be sad and you can be grieving and you can still be their functioning mother.
Absolutely. And you can still be happy and joyful and, cheering them on. You can be both at all times.
Yeah. So important. And I just want to go back to something that you said, which is that uh, grief, we can have sad moments,
Mm-hmm.
but I think they're not necessarily weak moments.
Ooh, absolutely.
And that's an important distinction because there's something also that's very strong and is a reflection of strength,
Yep.
which is to grieve. And
Absolutely.
grieving is not is not is not a space of weakness, or that you're grieving because you're not strong enough to not grieve.
Absolutely.
That's the wrong metric.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. We shouldn't be, it's not, grief isn't something you're going to get a trophy for at the end because you've survived or a gold medal. It's definitely not something we should be comparing, and it's definitely not a sign of weakness. If anything, it's just a sign of love, because when you love big, you're going to grieve big. And so the better you're out serving people and loving people, whether that's your mother, your friend, your neighbor, those are going to be harder stances of grief, more profound experiences. And so if anything, just know that, the grief is only there because you're missing something. And that was probably something worth missing.
Yes. And the most important pieces of our lives, the most important aspects of our lives are
Yes,
connection and relationships.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and you sound like you had a very, positive, really strong relationship with your mom. And not everyone has that.
Yes.
So that when they go into grief, it's it can be a very mixed feeling. And also the with death can also be the hope, because you talk about hope, that hope, and then there's the harsh reality that it's not going to get better. You're not going to have an opportunity. There isn't going to be that possibility of this relationship becoming better. I
Absolutely.
know that wasn't your experience, but
Yeah, but
nevertheless.
you're exactly right. Everybody has a mother, and that relationship looks extremely different. Like we discussed, our grief looks different. And so one thing that was really important to me is that that wasn't my story. My mother was, my biggest cheerleader and one of my greatest friends. But I have friends and others that are in my life, readers that have written to me and said, that's not my experience with my mom. My mom and I had a very complicated relationship. And so I actually include those sentiments in my book. So the end of each chapter ends with an essay called When It's Complicated. And I wrote those essays based around women that I talked to and listened to their personal experience that had mothers that were, not as present as they wanted them to be, or an addict, or, just a very complicated, complex relationship. And it was very important to me that I honor all of those pieces, because while this book and this, my writing is my story, I want everybody to see themselves in this light and this healing and this space. And so it was important to include those, because you're exactly right. Everybody's relationship, is on a scale of, complex to easy, and we're all somewhere kind of in the middle. So it's important to honor all of those relationships.
And being able to identify those feelings so that we know where we are, standing in our own shoes,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
is so important. And these are all spaces of strength, I think.
Absolutely. Strength and resiliency and just grit. You have to have that grit to keep going, whether that means, developing a legacy that replicates your mother's because it was one worth replicating, or whether that means maybe, changing that pattern and developing a legacy that looks completely different because you want something different for your life and your children. And so it's really up to you how you create that. It's yours to craft however you want.
What was something about your mother's legacy that you wanted to, you said, this is it. There can be lots of it,
Yeah.
but that there's one that's just really speaks to you and you feel very committed to.
Helping others and showing up for people even when they don't know it was you that showed up for them. And so that's so important. I try to do that every day in some capacity, whether it be very small or large. And yeah, and it's definitely one that I want my children to continue too, is just, really showing up for people and not just saying the words, actions, showing up for people in a way that they need, in a way that's helpful for them, in a way that meets their needs at the moment, whatever that may look like.
So that there's an attunement when you need support, somebody, when you need emotional support and somebody to listen to you. Getting a sandwich is
Right.
great, but it's not meshing. It's
Exactly.
not meshing. So if there's as happens, we're really getting to just our last few moments here. I just want to add that for my mother, because I thought about this
Yes.
a lot, and especially with my daughter's wedding last year, that my mother loved a good party. My mother loved a good party, and she was all in. And so my commitment and my legacy at that moment was to be all in,
I love
and in
that.
yeah, in having the best possible time. So as we're wrapping up, Chelsea, what's one message that you want to leave for people to, as a takeaway? There's so much that you've said, but what's the last one you want to leave here?
Yeah, I think just realize that if you've lost somebody, you are carrying their legacy and you're also carrying their own. And I hope that not maybe when the loss is fresh, but as time goes on, I hope that you find beauty and hope in both of them. And I hope that you can create something that is just beautiful and inspiring and help serve you and everything you want to leave behind.
Last question. What is your next disruption?
Oh, that's a good one. I think trying to navigate what it looks like to have your heart in the world. And, like you said, my book just came out last week. And so my next disruption is figuring out what comes next and what that looks like for me.
So I take your words as your book being out. It just came out. I'm so excited for you. I'm going underwater. I'm going to be under the surface now and writing chapter 7 of mine. And so I'm part of what I'm taking, in addition to all your beautiful and important words, is just the stick with itness
Yes.
and get through there. So I wish you enormous joy and transmission of the important messages that you want people to have, for them to know that they're not alone. However you're grieving is the way you need to grieve, and that when we miss people, there isn't a timeline there.
Right. Yes.
So I thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts and your heart and your experiences with us. I know that our communities are really going to be able to benefit from that. And so now it's time for us to take our cover shot
Yeah.
for this. Okay, I think you've heard about this. So if you need a hair fluff,
Yep.
do a hair, okay,
It's hard
get
to
a
see on
hair
my
fluff.
phone, so I hope I look good.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Okay, ready?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And one more. So thank you everyone for joining us today on Disruptive Conversations. Remember, positive change can happen at any point in your life. You're never too late. You still have your opportunity. See you next week, and I've saved a seat for you. See you then. Bye.
Thank you.